And welcome back. We are in chapter 18 of the Gospel of John, and we're with Dr. John Pauline. Dr. Pauline, you know, as we were reading here in verse 5, it says that, or verse 6, it says that Jesus said, I am He, you know, Jesus of Nazareth. And everybody draws back and falls to the ground. So it seems that just by His word, Jesus has the power to release Himself and His disciples. And here is Peter, whom you were talking about, trying to make things right. Here is, you know, he takes out his sword, and did he just overlook that even the words of Jesus could change everything around? And here he is with this little, you know, sword or pocket knife and trying to make a difference here. And you were saying, you know, how sometimes we often don't allow God to take charge, and we are, you know, thinking that we will make things better, but we don't.
Look at all the way through history how people have tried to fix God's problems. Mm-hmm. You know, the Inquisition. Well, you know, God can't handle all these heretics here, so we've got to do something about it. The Crusades, you know, God couldn't possibly allow the Muslims to have Jerusalem, so we got to do something about it. The suicide bombers today, somehow God has become small. You know, see, He's not really in control anymore, so we've got to do something really dramatic to save His skin. And John would just look at all of this and shake his head and say, you know, how silly.
Right.
Why does Peter see Jesus' divinity flashes here? We see the Father and, you know, and God in every full sense of the term. They fall back when Jesus says, I am.
Right.
Once again. Why does Peter still whip his sword out? Evidently, Jesus has made clear, let these guys go. Let my disciples go, but you can have me. Mm-hmm. And Peter, I think, felt a little shamed by that. And he said, I'm not going to let Jesus be taken. Mm-hmm. I'm going to step in. Unfortunately, later on, that virtually undermined Jesus' defense before Pilate, because his whole point was there, my servants won't fight to protect me because I'm not a political king. Mm. Peter acted the political role, and whenever politics and religion get together, bad things happen. Mm-hmm. And that's what was happening here.
Right.
So let's move on, and we can go to verses 12 through 27, and we see the trial before Annas and also Peter in the courtyard going on here. We talked already about the fact that Annas is running this trial as the high priest of choice. Notice he's the one that the Jews really felt was the high priest because he was still alive, having been high priest. But he's sort of getting their heads together, say, how shall we go about presenting this to Pilate? So Annas is still respected, perhaps, as the smart one who can really put it all together. And then they send it to Caiaphas as a bit more the hot-headed one. And then it goes on to Pilate. So anyway, interesting piece of this. Let's read verses 20 to 23, I think it is. Let me have a look here. Yes, some very interesting, go back to 19 to 23.
The high priest then asked Jesus about his disciples and his doctrine. Jesus answered him, I spoke openly to the world. I've always taught in synagogues and in the temple where the Jews always meet, and in secret I have said nothing. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. Indeed, they know what I said. And when he had said these things, one of the officers who stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, Do you answer the high priest like that? Jesus answered him, If I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why do you strike me?
Anything strange there that you didn't expect?
Well, the high priest here is a religious leader using violence to hit an innocent man, which is uncommon. It's like going to church and here is the pastor, you know, why didn't you do that?
And how does Jesus respond?
You know, what's my wrong here?
He protests.
Yeah.
Yeah. What would you think Jesus should have done? What does he say in the Sermon on the Mount? If somebody strikes you on the cheek, what do you do?
Let him give him the other cheek.
Turn the other cheek, yeah. Jesus doesn't do that here, does he?
Right.
Now, in the Gospel of John, Jesus is much more assertive. In the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he's the lowly Jesus, meek and mild, that we often think of. John has this masculine Jesus who doesn't put up with nonsense. High priest asks him a dumb question. He says, wait a minute. He says, why do you even need to ask? All kinds of people heard me. I haven't been teaching in secret. What I'm teaching is public knowledge. You don't need to even ask me this. That's a pretty assertive answer. Mm-hmm. And that's why he gets slapped in the face. And then he says, who gave you the right to hit me? Mm. Sometimes I think we tend to take one piece of the Bible and we run with it to an extreme. We can say, okay, you always turn the other cheek. Right. You never defend yourself. Mm-hmm. And so someone might let someone come into their house and violate the family and things like that. No, Christians are not to be a doormat that people just walk over. Mm. There's a balance between, on the one hand, in many circumstances, it might be a powerful witness to turn the other cheek. Mm-hmm. But in other circumstances, it's a powerful witness to speak up for yourself and to defend the helpless and to defend the oppressed. So Jesus shows us that this idea of a simple rule for all situations is probably not the most healthy or the most mature approach to his teachings. But Jesus himself, in different circumstances, could act a little bit differently. The other side of this that I like is as people look at me, they probably don't see too meek and mild. I'm a fairly big guy. I've got a big voice. Mm-hmm. I don't mind saying what I think, things like that. And I remember much of my life, I kind of felt guilty about that and thought that I should be more like Jesus. Mm-hmm. And then I discovered John's Jesus. And I said, all right. You see, Jesus is big enough for all of our personalities.
John's Jesus is my Jesus. That was your thought.
We shouldn't try to mold everybody into one mold.
Right.
Unity, the unity that Jesus prayed for, is not a unity where everybody thinks alike, everybody acts alike, everyone has the same personality. Mm-hmm. But it is unity in a blend of different personalities, unity in a blend of different ways of thinking. That is what makes the unity so striking in the world. When a couple gets together and gets married, there's a unity there, but they're not going to think alike. They're not going to have the same personalities. In fact, people tend to marry their opposite because they want to balance themselves out.
Right.
And then after you get married, you look at your opposite and say, why did I do this to me? Mm-hmm. Why did I do it to myself? And so learning to deal with differences, learning to forgive, learning to get along with people who think differently is the essence of the unity that Jesus was praying for. And we see here in the story, Jesus was not a cookie-cutter Christian, so to speak. Jesus could, sometimes he would be silent. In some parts of these trials, he was silent. Before Annas here, he's very assertive. So you want to get both pictures of Jesus. Don't just make a judgment from one piece of the Bible. So often we argue over things where both of them are right. They're both seeing something in Scripture that's worth remembering. And so finding, for me, it is the whole Bible that is the authority, not the Bible that this person might prefer. Thomas Jefferson just cut out little sayings of Jesus. That's my Bible, Thomas Jefferson's Bible. And it was a good Bible because it's the sayings of Jesus, right. But it isn't the whole picture. And when people take one part of the Bible and ignore the rest, they quickly go to extremes.
Now we see here that Annas could not answer that question, why do you strike me? So it's verse 24 says that Annas sent him, and he sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest, right?
Right.
And now Caiaphas has that case to him.
But we have nothing in the Gospel of John to tell us what happened there. What does happen here in a double stage is that you have Peter and the beloved disciple out in the courtyard. And this is the only gospel where somebody's with Peter. And so the role of John is portrayed because he was actually there. What's unique here is it tells us that the maid who identifies Peter was also the doorkeeper, and she knew John. So that's a couple of details we didn't know from the others. tells us the weather was cold. In March in Jerusalem, it can be quite pleasant or it can be quite cold. It kind of goes back and forth. So it tells us the reason there was a fire there was that it was cold and people were trying to stay warm. And it also tells us that he was recognized by a relative of Malchus. Malchus was the fellow whose ear he cut off. And it's a relative of Malchus that recognizes Peter. Oh, you're the one. So Peter's boldness gets him into trouble. He's too bold in the garden.
Right.
He's too timid when he gets into the courtyard. There he's not confessing Jesus. So he's on the wrong side both ways. Peter's someone who's out of balance. So this brings us into the trial before Pilate. And as I mentioned earlier, Pilate really is like a secondary star of this one here, because he's much more involved than he was in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And here we see Pilate acting the role of a judge. And he's actually doing it pretty properly. He's asking the right questions. I mean, if you and I were faced with that situation, we might ask some strange questions. But Pilate, he's doing what a judge is supposed to do. And seeing how Pilate relates to Jesus is a very important piece of the puzzle. But we'll continue with that in the next program.
Well, Dr. Pauline, I look forward to that next Bible study. And you know, one of the lessons that I've learned is that now that I think about it, sometimes in the midst of my problems and hardships, I do not consult God, and I don't make it a habit to pray about my problems and allow God to take charge. And friends, I invite you to place God first in your lives. That way, things can go better. God bless.